Hello everyone and welcome to the third of our Bless videos, and today we're looking at the practice of eating, which really goes hand in hand with the one we looked at last time, listening, because if we eat and combine that with listening to people, then it can really take a casual friendship and make it become so much deeper. There's a true story I read from America that went viral on social media a few years ago. And that was of a man called Eric, an African American man in baggy jeans and a cap, who was in McDonald's eating breakfast by himself. And there was a white woman, 70-year-old granny called Jan, who was doing the same. And she saw Eric eat on his own, and she went over to him and asked if she could eat with him, to which he replied yes. So they sat together for about 45 minutes, eating about all sorts of subjects, Jan sharing her wisdom on various things, and at the end of it they exchanged numbers and Eric walked her to her car. A very simple story, and yet for some reason it spread like wildfire on social media. So why did that happen when there's nothing particularly extraordinary about it? I think it's because it's so rare. That kind of sharing food with one another is something our world longs for and yet often lacks. We live in such an individualistic society. Neighbours rarely share meals together. Hospitality is seen as an extravagant gesture of goodwill. But what if it wasn't so rare? What would it look like if we were proactive in expressing Jesus' love by sharing a meal with people? Much of Jesus' ministry was done around meals, around eating with other people. In Luke's Gospel alone, there are 9 stories of Jesus eating and talking with people. Chapter 5, he eats with tax collectors and sinners at Levi's house. Chapter 7, he is anointed at the home of Simon the Pharisee during a meal. Chapter 9, he feeds 5,000. Chapter 10, he eats at the home of Mary and Martha. Chapter 11, he condemns the Pharisees and teachers of the law at a meal. Chapter 14, he's at a meal when he urges people to invite the poor to their meals, not just their friends. Chapter 19, he invites himself to dinner with Zacchaeus. Chapter 22, he eats the Last Supper with his disciples. Chapter 24, he has a meal with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Robert Karris notes this, and he says that in Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. And even when he's not eating, he makes references to food in all sorts of ways. So in Luke's Gospel, there's the parables. Chapter 14, there's the parable of the great banquet. Chapter 15, there's the parable of the prodigal son with the celebration and party full of food at the end. Food and eating is everywhere in the ministry of Jesus. And if you were asked in what ways Jesus blessed people through his life on the earth, you might say by teaching, by performing miracles, by healing people, by dying on a cross, by rising from the dead. And all of these, of course, are true, but you probably, before today, wouldn't have said or had very high up on your list eating with people. And yet it was central to how he loved others. One of my favourite verses on this subject is Luke 7, verses 34 and 35, where it says, "The Son of Man has come eating and drinking. And you say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." There are 2 other statements in the New Testament that start, "The Son of Man came." Mark 10, verse 45 says, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Luke 19, verse 10 says, "The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." These are statements of purpose, why the Son of Man came. But that first one, the Son of Man came eating and drinking, is a statement of method. It's how he came. The Son of Man is Daniel's term for the one who comes from God to receive authority over the nations. And this Son of Man doesn't come as might be expected in his first coming. Of course, he does in his second coming, but in his first coming with armies of angels or in a great blaze of glory. But he comes, he says, eating and drinking. He had a reputation of being one who hung out with people, eating with them and drinking with them. This isn't just something he did to survive. He didn't just eat to survive, but he enjoyed food, he enjoyed drink, and he enjoyed that with others. He enjoyed parties. Of course, Jesus never got drunk, but by being associated with people who did, this was clearly an accusation that was thrown at him at times. But Jesus didn't seem to mind that, because it was an essential part of his mission to save them. Jesus' mission strategy was often over a long meal, stretching into the evening. He did evangelism and discipleship around a table with some grilled fish, a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine, or probably a jug of wine. Meals for us have become something of a commodity, really, something to get through, to give us some energy while we get on with something else, often multitasking at the same time. But in Jesus' culture, they were a statement of friendship. You were affirming value and dignity in the person that you were eating with. It showed that you loved them and that you cared for them. In the ministry of Jesus, meals were enacted grace. And even today, really, when you eat with someone, you are, although it may not be such a common thing, actually you are showing value to them. You're showing that that person is a friend, or is at least becoming a friend. And that's why Jesus' actions of eating with the sinners of the day, those despised by others, was so scandalous, because in doing so, he was showing that he was inviting these people into friendship with him. One of my favourite examples is Matthew chapter 9. Verses 9 to 13, which is the calling of Matthew, which is a brilliant story because it's written by Matthew, the guy that Jesus is calling, and so I think I just love it. Anyway, it says this. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Matthew follows Jesus, and the very first thing that we read happens is Jesus eating with him. It's brilliant. It's absolute classic Jesus. We don't read him teaching him, but we read him eating with him. Of course, he may well have been teaching him at the same time, but eating was just the first thing he went to do. He wanted to build relationship connection with this man. And it's a meal in which he's surrounded by lots of other sinners, the irreligious, those known for being bad at the time. That's who he was choosing to spend time with, to eat with, and to call into friendship through this meal. And the religious people can't believe it. They are offended. Why is Jesus eating with these kinds of people? And so Jesus challenges them with the Bible, the thing they're meant to know in and out and be acting on, through the words, God desires mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus is saying, in other words, I am displaying through this meal the merciful heart of God. I am showing in eating with these people that God wants to eat with them, that God wants to be friends with them, and there is a way back to him. It's eating with people is this display in many ways of the grace of God, of the invitation of God to eat with him. It says Jesus is knocking on the door, wanting to come in that he may eat with us and us with him. If people aren't saved through meals, they're saved through the gospel, the good news of Jesus' death on the cross. But meals will create natural opportunities to share that message in a context that resonates with what you're saying. A theologian and chef, Simon Carey Holt, says this. He says, at base, hospitality is about providing a space for God's Spirit to move. Setting the table, cooking a meal, washing the dishes is the ministry of facilitation. I love that, the ministry of facilitation. Providing a context in which people feel loved and welcome, and where God's Spirit can be at work in their lives. Hospitality is a very ordinary business, but in its ordinariness, it is its real worth. I think that's really deep and profound. Hospitality brings mission into the ordinary. But the ordinary is where people live. They don't live in the extraordinary, they live in the ordinary, and that is where we need to meet them, which is why eating with people, such an ordinary act, is such a beautiful space for the gospel to be shown and spoken of. But there are all sorts of excuses we could come up with of why we can't eat with people, those who are not yet believers. Number one would be it's too scary. How will people evaluate my cooking or my cleaning or my decor or my parenting? We really need the fear of the Lord over fear of man in every area of our life, including this. We need to die to that desire to impress other people, because much of the thing that holds us back might be, I can't have someone in my home because of this or because of that. And it's about impressing. It only matters what Jesus thinks, and he loves your efforts. You might say it's too scary because you can't cook. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a really simple meal. But also, if that's really an issue, then it could just be a cup of tea and a biscuit. That might well have a similar impact. In fact, in our culture in the Northeast, I think often that might work better than inviting someone over for a fancy dinner and an evening. With our neighbours, we've just been we're in the very early stages of this kind of stuff. We haven't done lots of it, but I'm freshly challenged as I've been preparing this. But just things like inviting them over for Christmas drinks, low key. We haven't had lots, but we have had people, and there's been some relationship, some connection that we've started at least through something like that. Maybe a barbecue in the summer. It's kind of low key. It's people bring their own meat and stuff, and people can muck in. Could be a way to go. Maybe for some of us who live on our own, inviting the family who live next door might be a bit scary. We're not used to cooking for young children or having maybe young children in our house, but we can be creative. Maybe just invite them for a cake or go out somewhere for a picnic that people bring their own stuff for in the summer. The thing is, it's not about what you're eating, but who you're eating with. God can work in the midst of the ordinary, unimpressive act of hospitality, and that's what we need to remember. It doesn't have to be impressive, it can just be very ordinary. So firstly, we might say it's too scary. Secondly, we might say we're too shy. All I would say to this is that think about what you can learn from them by listening and asking questions. The kinds of listening questions we looked at last time. If you have invite someone around, one of the key things is just asking questions, getting to know them, connecting with them in that way. And the third excuse might be that we're too busy. This is a classic, and I can definitely fall into this one myself. But the thing is, eating is already in our schedules. Most of us have 21 of these eating slots in a week. And so we're not necessarily adding anything extra to our schedule, but trying to use one of those slots, some of those slots, to intentionally connect with our neighbours, with whoever that may be. For some of us, maybe it's a lunchtime in our workplace where rather than eating on our own, we choose to eat with someone that we work with. Maybe it's inviting a friend over for a quick coffee, or inviting neighbours around for a lunch on a Saturday, maybe with someone else from the church as well. Maybe some of our community groups could do some meals together, a barbecue or something that we invite friends who aren't yet believers to. Maybe we can join in with the cultural events in our community, things like doing carols on our street, as we heard Phil talk about the other night. Maybe hot dogs on the bonfire, on bonfire night. Or an Easter egg hunt in your garden, or for those who like it, the Eurovision Song Contest, and you have some people around for something, some pizza or something while you're watching that, or other sporting events that you could use, like Olympics or the World Cup or Wimbledon. There are all sorts of ways that we can build it into what's already happening in our schedule, in our lives. And so the tool for this practice, in the book that this is all kind of based out of, is the Blessed Meal Calendar. In the book, it talks about trying to have a week, every week, think of a slot of your 21 eating slots when you can eat with someone who is not yet a believer. For some of us, maybe that's a bit of a big step. I think probably is for me, but maybe we could plan monthly initially and think over the next month, beginning of the month, which of these 21 times 4 slots, in other words, which of these 84 slots in the next 4 weeks could I be intentional about trying to make sure there is a connection, there is an eating opportunity with someone who's not yet a believer. And maybe we could say, which one could I use for that someone in my church community, my church family, that I can build friendship with as well.